The famous and much beloved television actress Betty White passed away late last week at the ripe old age of 99. And if there's any event in the news that you would think could never possibly be turned into an excuse for an angry, mewling, radical feminist diatribe, you would think the death of Betty White would be it. But think again, says some self-loathing harpy spinster by the name of Christina Wyman, who for some reason wrote an op-ed piece which was for some reason published by NBC News, which I, for some reason, had the misfortune of stumbling upon and then reading first thing yesterday morning. Now, I like to think, broadly speaking, that I'm not ordinarily given to hyperbole or frivolous overstatement, so I really do mean it when I say this might be the honest-to-God stupidest article I have ever read in my life. It's less of an opinion piece, really, and more of just a bitter, unhappy person taking us on a guided tour of all the resentments and neuroses that live inside of her head. Oh, and her day job? Young adult novelist. Because that's freaking great. That's just lovely. But I figure if it has to live in my head, then it has to live in your head too. So let's begin with a quick reading of the first paragraph, and then we'll start unpacking, for there is much to unpack. Begin quote. Since Betty White's death, it's been difficult to find tributes that don't describe her first and foremost as America's grandmother or great-grandmother. While it's widely known that White was a stepmother to her late husband Alan Ludden's 3 children, it's important to remember that she was intentionally child-free and thus opted out of having biological children. So why, in remembering White, does the media lead with identities such as grandmother and great-grandmother in describing her life and professional accomplishments? Close quote. See? Did I lie? And that's just a little taste. Now, when I was reading this thing for the first time yesterday, and I stopped after the first paragraph, and I thought to myself, just based on that one paragraph, what have I been able to glean about the person who wrote it? Well, first and most obviously, I guarantee she doesn't have any children, and I guarantee she doesn't feel all that good about it in her heart of hearts. Second, I can state with around an 80% degree of confidence that she is morbidly obese, has jello-colored hair, a minimum of 1 facial piercing, at least 2 visible tattoos, and she's probably got those big freaky weird hockey puck things in her earlobes too, because why the hell not? She probably also has had at least 1 abortion. But my God, does this woman wear her self-loathing on her sleeve, or doesn't she? It's really quite a remarkable thing to read, especially the bit which you may have noticed, where she repeats the exact same assertion twice in a row using different words. Quote, it's important to remember that she was intentionally child-free and thus opted out of having biological children. Close quote. Really? Oh, you don't say. So she was intentionally child-free and she opted out of having biological children? Who even knew those were different things? Thank heaven we have this young adult novelist to explain these complicated things to us, right? Okay, here comes the second paragraph. Begin quote. For a point of comparison, several male celebrities died last year. None of them have been described as the country's father, or grandfather, or great-grandfather, regardless of whether they've had children. Many of them had children and grandchildren and yet managed to evade these titles when the media covered their professional achievements. Worse yet, White's professional highlights, rather than taking center stage, are often relegated to a subtitle, as though her groundbreaking 80-year career and work with animal advocacy are not nearly as important as the public's desire to view her as a maternal figure first. Close quote. And it's a pretty rare thing when you can read 2 paragraphs by a person you've never heard of and conclude with a fair degree of certitude that, wow, this is the most miserable, joyless person in the whole wide world. But if you're watching right now, Ms. Wyman, may I call you Ms. Wyman? First, I don't know anything about the content of your young adult novels, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't want my kids reading them. Because, madam, you are not well. You have an exceedingly disordered mind, and you are not remotely at peace with the life choices you have made for yourself. The things you've written here about Betty White don't tell me anything I didn't know about her, but they do tell me that you hate yourself quite a great deal. But since you've posed these questions, Ms. Galaxy Brain, let me take a moment and answer them for you. Number 1. People are using honorifics like grandmother to describe Betty White because she was a beloved person. And for most people, their grandmother is the person in their life for whom they've had the most unconditional love and affection and the warmest feelings. Calling a woman grandma who isn't actually your grandmother is just about the highest compliment that can be paid from one person to another. Number 2. We use descriptors of maternal love because maternal love is the best kind of love. And Ms. Wyman, she seems to realize this, at least subconsciously, and it's obviously that she's trying desperately to convince herself that her own decision not to have children, which of course is duly confirmed later on in the article, wasn't a horrible, awful mistake that she can never take back. I would furthermore advise Ms. Wyman, if she really doesn't understand any of this, if she didn't just write this piece as a polemic exercise, to visit any cemetery anywhere in the United States, or hell, anywhere in the world, and take note of what is etched on the gravestones of the women who are buried there. You will see hundreds upon hundreds of beloved wife, beloved mother, beloved grandmother, amada abuela, and so on. But you know what you'll see zero of? You won't see, she was really proud that she was child-free, or she very much enjoyed dying alone and forgotten, or she was really glad she stayed in college for a decade and got an advanced degree so she could become a middle manager down at the widget factory, or she never regretted that she spent all her childbearing years drinking and partying and having disposable relationships with random partners. Ms. Wyman, they sold you something that was gift-wrapped as happiness and freedom, but inside the box was nothing but misery and loneliness and despair. And yeah, it's freaking sad as hell. I feel badly for people like this, but I do reserve the right to mock them mercilessly for it. When they write asinine crap like this for nationwide public consumption. Isn't that right, Jim Eagle? From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we are so old-fashioned we make the spinsters actually spin. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And staying for just a moment on the subject of Betty White's passing, I was listening to Michael Knowles' show the other day, and one of his email commenters remarked something to the effect of, Betty White was the last public figure in the United States who was universally beloved. We don't have anybody else like that now. And then yesterday, during the email segment, again, they revisited the point, and the only other names they could come up with, the host and the commenters alike, with 2 full days to have thought about it, were Willie Nelson and Dolly Parton. And I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, first of all, I reject the original premise, and second, there's lots of names I would place above those two. So as you have no doubt guessed by now, I felt it my duty to save these young people from their own ignorance and to prepare my own list of nominees, which I have done. And I have 4 nominees each in 4 different categories, and I have seeded them from number 1 to number 4 in their respective brackets. And hey, if anybody wants to play the thing out and do it tournament style, we can do that. Just drop a comment, tell me. Otherwise, maybe we'll just invite them all to a neutral site and settle things with a series of steel cage death matches. But I'm just the host, so I leave that decision up to the audience. The 4 categories are these: 1, sports; 2, music; 3, movies; 4, military and government. And I only did a tiny little bit of fudging with one of the categories, which I'll explain when we get to it. When I began jotting down names, it wasn't with any criteria in mind. I was just jotting the names that popped into my head as I pondered the question of who is the most widely beloved living American. And it only recently became an interesting question, frankly. Anytime between 1969 and 2012, it was a no-brainer. It's Neil Armstrong. And for 4 years after Armstrong passed away, it was still a no-brainer in my judgment. Muhammad Ali. And I'm tempted to say it was still a no-brainer up until just last month when Chuck Yeager left us. But now I think it's a wide-open question. And I think these conversations are worth having. I think they're instructive in trying to distill a snapshot of the culture as it currently stands. Now, rather than going category by category, I think it's more interesting to begin with the number 4 seeds and work our way up to the number 1 seeds, the last of which ultimately will be my pick for the holder of the title. So let's begin, shall we? The number 4 seed in the sports category is the Say Hey Kid, Willie Mays, who I'm happy to report is still with us as we begin 2022, though with all due respect to Willie, if I was drawing up the list 1 year ago today, I would have had Henry Aaron in this spot, who totally wasn't killed by the COVID vaccine, by the way. It's just an incredibly sad coincidence that he was in perfect health before taking the shot and wound up stone dead within 24 hours. But moving on. The number 4 seed in the music category is Dolly Parton, whom I retained from Michael Knowles' picks because she's a good pick, and also because I realized I had no women on my own list. So there you go, haters. This is a diverse, inclusive list. The number 4 seed in the movie category is George Lucas, who is held in greater esteem and reverence today, 10 years after selling Star Wars to Disney, than he ever was back when he was simultaneously the owner of the franchise and the most hated person in it. 10 years ago, George Lucas could never be on this list, but today he's earned his spot with a big assist from Kathleen Kennedy. And the number 4 seed in military and government is Gene Kranz. Granted, a lot of people might not know the name Gene Kranz just by hearing it, but if you say the guy in the vest from Apollo 13, then everybody knows whom you're talking about. And they say, yeah, I love that guy. He's great. Which he is. And his achievements more than warrant his spot on this list. Moving on now to the number 3 seeds. First, from military and government, Captain Jim Lovell, U.S. Navy veteran of Gemini 7 and Apollo 8, commander of Gemini 12 and Apollo 13, America's greatest living astronaut. And I feel bad leaving Frank Borman off the list, who was actually Lovell's commander, of course, on Gemini 7 and Apollo 8. But owing to the notoriety that he got from the movie, Lovell is just a more widely known figure than Borman is, whether that's right or wrong. Number 3 seed from sports, Big George Foreman. The greatest redemption story in the history of sports. A thoroughly decent man, a proud American patriot, and a 2-time heavyweight champion of the world who regained the title at age 45, 20 years after having lost it. The number 3 seed from music, Willie Nelson, whom I also retained from Knowles' list, because he belongs on the list, not just for his musical achievements, but also because it should be impossible to smoke that freaking much weed and remain alive into your 80s. The number 3 seed from movies, Harrison Ford. Not really much to explain here. When you're Han Solo and Indiana Jones and you've still got a pulse, you're on this list. And we're on to the number 2 seeds now, and this is the one where I fudged a little bit, because in military and government, I have assigned the number 2 seed to Clint Eastwood, who qualifies for the category by virtue of being an Army veteran and the former mayor of Carmel, California, and because I had an imbalance between the categories, so I had to move somebody, and he was it. Number 3 from sports, the Golden Bear, Jack Nicklaus. And yes, I know what you're thinking. I did think rather long and hard about putting Tiger Woods in this spot, but I think Jack is held in higher esteem by the public than Tiger is. Not just because he's had significantly fewer sex scandals, but because he still owns the record for most major tournaments won. Number 2, from music, Bob Dylan. And if any entry on this list requires no explanation, it's this one. If you had a songwriting contest between Dylan and all other songwriters since 1960 put together, Dylan probably wins. His achievements as a recording artist and a live performer almost need not be mentioned. And he's still out there working his ass off as a full-time touring musician and band leader right now in his 82nd year, so there's that too. The number 2 seed from movies, Morgan Freeman. When they cast you to play God and nobody complains about the casting choice, you're on the list. And that's pretty much it. And we're on to the number 1 seeds, which you may interpret, if you so choose, as my choices for the top 4 spots on the overall list, so I'll take them in ascending order. Number 4 overall, the number 1 seed from military and government, is the artist formerly known as Colonel Edwin Eugene Aldrin, better known as Buzz, veteran of Gemini 12, where he flew with Jim Lovell and became the first astronaut to perform useful work outside the spacecraft, which he was able to do because he was also the inventor of underwater neutral buoyancy training, which is still used to this day just the way he invented it, and he was also the first guy who ever did his doctoral thesis on the mechanics of orbital rendezvous. And his least auspicious achievement was being the second man to walk on the moon on Apollo 11. Number 2, from music, Tony Bennett, who he might have just been another 50s crooner gone by, but amazingly, he staged a massively successful comeback in the mid-90s and gained millions more fans from people in my generation. People who were just turning 30 at the time, who should have had no interest in a tuxedoed balladeer who turned 40 before we were even born, but he went and pulled it off. Became an artist who can make that rarest of all claims, to be an active performer with 3 generations of devoted fans. He finally just had to give up live performance last year, past his 90th birthday, due to the progression of Alzheimer's disease, and we wish him nothing but the best for however much time he has remaining. Number 2, from movies, Tom Hanks. And you may have noticed, though I never did, frankly, until I had finished composing the list, that 3 out of the 16 entrants have something to do with the Apollo 13 mission or movie. We've got the commander, the flight director, and the actor who played the commander, which I suppose probably offers some insight into my own biases, but nonetheless, I stand by the selections. Hell, I'm old enough to remember when Tom Hanks was the guy on Bosom Buddies, playing a guy who dressed up as a woman so he could rent the apartment he wanted. And amazingly, nobody called him transphobic. And what a wondrously simpler time it was back then. And so here we've arrived at the end. The number 1 seed from sports, the number 1 pick overall for most beloved American who is currently alive. From the Chicago Bulls, Washington Wizards, and Birmingham Barons, number 23, occasionally number 45, Michael Jordan, who's also at age 58, the youngest person on this list, and that's a fact I think we probably should not ignore. Everyone in the realm of public celebrity today, it seems, wants to be a political ideologue. And when you start going down that road, you stop being the sort of person who appears on lists of the most widely beloved people in the country, because you've chosen to preclude yourself from having access to such levels of esteem and respect. I've only got 1 entrant out of the 16 who can be described as a political partisan, and that's Clint Eastwood, but I would submit that he fairly earned his spot on the list before he ever came out strongly as a conservative or sought elected office. And I wonder if it ever occurs to public figures of the younger generations that when they're constantly chasing upvotes and approval on social media, saying whatever things are fashionable on any given day, that they are in fact precluding themselves from ever being the sorts of people who are widely mourned and lamented by the population at large when they ultimately die. If we were to revisit this episode 2 or 3 years from now, it's likely that 12 or more of the entrants will no longer be with us. And then, if you asked me to come up with another 16 who are held in similarly high regard by broad swaths of the general population, irrespective of any political consideration, I think I might be hard-pressed to come up with another list of 16. And that's a serious problem. If we don't have at least some handful of people that we can all agree are admirable and praiseworthy, we have no culture. And when we have no culture, we have no nation. So I hope this little exercise has been useful or instructive on some level for what it's worth. I quite enjoyed putting it together and deliberating the list of names. I think I only erased and replaced 3 names after the first pass, so I feel like it's a pretty solid group of selections. And granted, these were just names off the top of my head. I didn't refer to any other lists or anything, so it's possible that there's some screamingly obvious entry that I've overlooked, and if so, please do let me know in the comments. And that's it for me tonight. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I'll be back Friday. Until then, here's wishing everyone a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.